What happens when prejudice blinds someone to their humanity? Can one night change a heart forever? This story begins with a 70-year-old black woman, Helen Walker, seeking shelter at a small-town old home on a cold winter night. Exhausted and vulnerable, Helen believes she's found a safe place to rest. But her relief is short-lived. Gregory Miller, the old home's manager, coldly denies her entry, not because of capacity or rules, but because of the color of her skin. Helen's pleas for compassion are met with hostility, leaving her with nowhere else to go. Forced to endure a night of discomfort and humiliation, Helen's resilience is tested. But as dawn approaches, the story takes a dramatic turn. Helen's son, Marcus Walker, arrives to confront the injustice. What unfolds next is a battle for dignity, justice, and change. Stay with us to see how one woman's strength and one man's awakening can teach a lesson that echoes far beyond this small town. Helen Walker was a woman of quiet strength. At 70, she had weathered a lifetime of challenges, but nothing could prepare her for the humiliation she faced on this cold winter night. Seeking a safe haven, she arrived at a modest old home tucked away on a quiet street. The lights inside glowed warmly against the frosty air, promising comfort and safety, or so she thought. Gregory Miller, the manager of the old home, greeted her with icy indifference. A middle-aged white man with a stern demeanor, Gregory was known for his rigid enforcement of rules. But this time, his refusal wasn't about policy. It was about prejudice. Helen, tired and vulnerable, was turned away, her only fault being the color of her skin. As Helen stood shivering outside, the scene painted a grim picture of injustice. Inside, Gregory justified his actions, while others silently watched, too afraid to intervene. The tension was palpable, and the chilly air seemed to mirror the coldness of Gregory's heart. Meanwhile, Marcus Walker, Helen's son, was unaware of the ordeal his mother was enduring. But by morning, his arrival would set off a chain of events that no one in this small town would forget. The stage was set for a confrontation that would not only test human decency but also challenge deeply rooted prejudice. Helen Walker stepped into the old home, her frail frame leaning heavily on her cane. The cold winter air had left her cheeks flushed, and her tired eyes darted around, searching for warmth and kindness. She approached the front desk, where Gregory Miller, the manager, was seated. Dressed in a crisp suit with a tight expression, Gregory looked up and froze, his face hardening as he took in Helen's appearance. "We don't have any rooms available," he said, his tone sharp and dismissive. Helen, taken aback, clutched her coat tighter. "Please, sir. I just need a place for the night." "I have nowhere else to go," she said softly, her voice trembling. Gregory's lips curled into a frown. "It's policy. We can't take in just anyone," he snapped. "Policy? What policy would turn away a 70-year-old woman on a freezing night?" Helen shot back, her voice gaining strength despite her exhaustion. A small crowd of staff members gathered nearby, their faces showing discomfort. They exchanged nervous glances but remained silent, unwilling to challenge Gregory. Helen's voice cracked as she continued, "I've lived through enough hardships in my life. I deserve some dignity, not this cruelty." Gregory's expression remained cold, but the pressure of the moment began to weigh on him. With a dismissive wave of his hand, he finally muttered, "Fine. You can stay, but don't expect special treatment." The bitterness in his tone was palpable as he pointed her toward a bench in the hallway. The staff dispersed, their silence an unspoken agreement to stay out of it. Helen walked slowly to the bench, her heart heavy, knowing she'd been allowed to stay not out of kindness, but out of reluctant obligation. The hallway was dimly lit, with a faint hum from the fluorescent lights above. Helen sat on the cold wooden bench Gregory had pointed to, her frail body aching from the day's journey. The bench, hard and unwelcoming, was clearly not meant for anyone to sleep on, let alone someone her age. As the hours passed, Helen's stomach growled. She had asked for food earlier, but Gregory had scoffed, claiming there wasn't enough to spare. The other residents in the home peeked out from their rooms, their sympathetic eyes meeting hers. A few whispered words of comfort reached her ears, but no one dared step out to help her. The fear of Gregory's wrath loomed too large. The cold seeped into her bones as Helen adjusted her coat to keep warm. Her mind began to drift, bringing back memories of past struggles. She recalled her days as a young woman fighting for civil rights, marching for equality in a world that seemed to always turn its back on her. The echoes of chants and the faces of those who stood beside her flickered in her mind. A loud creak from the hallway broke her thoughts, and Helen's eyes darted toward the source of the sound. The eerie silence of the old home felt oppressive, amplifying her sense of isolation. She closed her eyes, trying to will herself to sleep, but the cold bench and her swirling emotions made rest impossible. As the night dragged on, Helen's body ached from the lack of proper support, and her heart ached from the blatant injustice she had endured. The whispers of sympathy from the residents, though kind, were not enough to ease her pain. She was used to enduring hardships, but this night felt particularly cruel. Helen sat upright, her eyes staring into the distance. She thought of her son, Marcus, and hoped he would come for her in the morning. For now, she resolved to stay strong, just as she always had. This night, no matter how difficult, would not break her. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the frosty windows as Marcus Walker parked his car outside the old home. He stepped out, his tall frame tense with worry. The phone call from his mother last night had left him restless, and he had driven through the early morning hours to see her. As he entered the building, Marcus immediately spotted his mother. Helen was slumped on a cold wooden bench, her face pale and her eyes sunken with exhaustion. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to sit upright, her discomfort unmistakable. "Mom." Marcus rushed to her side, his voice filled with concern. Helen looked up, her eyes welling with tears at the sight of her son. "Marcus," she whispered weakly. "It was a rough night." Marcus's expression hardened as he glanced around. The hallway was eerily quiet, and the atmosphere felt heavy with unspoken tension. Spotting Gregory near the front desk, Marcus stood up, his jaw tightening. He approached Gregory, his voice firm and unwavering. "Are you the manager here?" Gregory looked up, startled by Marcus's commanding presence. "Yes, I am," he replied curtly, his usual arrogance creeping into his tone. "Then you're the one responsible for this," Marcus said, pointing toward his mother. "Why was my mother left to sleep on a bench all night? She's 70 years old." Gregory's face turned red, a mix of guilt and irritation. "Look, we don't have special accommodations for everyone who shows up," he began defensively. "That's not an answer." Marcus snapped, his voice rising. "You denied her basic human decency. Do you even understand what she's been through?" The heated exchange drew the attention of residents and staff, who began to gather quietly in the hallway. Murmurs spread as people watched Marcus stand his ground. Marcus's frustration peaked. He pulled out his phone. "If you think this is acceptable, let's see what the authorities have to say," he said, dialing 911. "Wait a minute, there's no need for that." Gregory protested, his tone growing more defensive. "Oh, there's every need," Marcus shot back. "You're going to answer for what you've done." As Marcus ended the call, Helen watched her son with a mixture of pride and relief. For the first time that night, she felt hope. The sound of sirens pierced the air as a police cruiser pulled up to the old home. 2 officers stepped inside, their presence immediately commanding attention. The gathered crowd of residents and staff parted to make way for them. The lead officer, a stern-looking man with a no-nonsense demeanor, approached Marcus. "Sir, we received a call. Can you tell us what's going on here?" Marcus gestured toward his mother, who was still sitting on the bench. "This is my mother, Helen Walker. She came here last night seeking shelter, but she was denied a proper place to sleep or even a meal. The manager, Gregory, left her to suffer on that bench all night." The officer turned to Helen, his eyes softening as he noticed her frailty. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked gently. Helen nodded weakly. "I'm tired, officer. It was a long, cold night." Marcus continued, his tone resolute. "This isn't just poor management. This is negligence, and I believe it's rooted in prejudice. The officer turned to Gregory, whose face had turned pale. Is this true? Gregory stammered, his confidence visibly shaken. It's not like that. We have policies, and I was just following them, he said weakly. At that moment, a resident stepped forward. I saw everything, the elderly woman said. She was treated unfairly. We all saw it. Another staff member hesitated but eventually spoke up. It's true. Gregory refused to give her proper accommodations. It was cruel. The officer glanced around, taking note of the growing testimonies. Do you have any proof of this? Marcus stepped forward, showing his phone. I recorded part of our conversation this morning. It clearly shows Gregory admitting he didn't provide her with basic care. The officer listened to the recording, his expression growing stern. He then addressed Gregory directly. Sir, do you realize this could have legal consequences? Neglect and discrimination are serious allegations. Gregory opened his mouth to respond but faltered, unable to provide a valid defense. The weight of the evidence and the stares from those around him seemed to crush his usual arrogance. We'll be filing a report on this, the officer said firmly. For now, you're warned. If further evidence comes to light, you could face charges. As the officers documented statements from witnesses, Gregory stood frozen, his world beginning to unravel. Meanwhile, Marcus knelt beside his mother, his hand gently resting on hers. Mom, this isn't over. We'll make sure no one else is treated like this again, he said softly. Helen nodded, her eyes glistening with gratitude. The commotion had quieted, but the weight of what had transpired hung heavily in the air. Gregory sat alone in his office, the door slightly ajar. The voices of residents and staff replayed in his mind like an unrelenting echo. Their words stung, forcing him to confront the harsh truth about himself. For the first time, Gregory felt the crushing weight of shame. As he stared blankly at the desk in front of him, a soft knock broke the silence. Looking up, he saw Helen standing in the doorway, leaning on her cane. Her frail frame seemed smaller than ever, but her expression carried a calm strength. May I come in? She asked, her voice kind but steady. Gregory hesitated before nodding, unsure of what to expect. Helen stepped inside and took a seat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, to Gregory's surprise, Helen broke the silence. I've seen a lot in my 70 years, she began. Hatred, pain, and struggles that I wouldn't wish on anyone. But I've also learned one thing, holding on to anger only makes the burden heavier. Gregory looked at her, his guilt evident. Mrs. Walker, Helen raised a hand, stopping him gently. What you did was wrong. There's no denying that. But I'm not here to accuse you anymore. I'm here to ask you to be better, not just for me, but for everyone who comes through these doors. Her words hit Gregory like a tidal wave. He couldn't understand why, after everything, she would choose forgiveness. I don't deserve your kindness, he admitted, his voice cracking. I've been blind. Blind to what's right. And I see that now. Helen smiled faintly. It's not about deserving. It's about choosing to grow. Gregory's eyes brimmed with tears. The walls he had built around himself for years began to crumble. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. For everything. For the way I treated you and for letting my prejudice cloud my judgment. I promise I'll change. At that moment, Marcus entered the room, having overheard part of the conversation. His arms were crossed, his stance guarded. Words are easy, Gregory, Marcus said firmly. It's the actions that matter. Gregory nodded solemnly. You're right. And I'll prove it. Not just to you, but to everyone. Helen reached out, placing a hand over Gregory's trembling one. It's never too late to do what's right, she said softly. The events of that fateful day left a lasting impact on everyone involved. Gregory kept his word. Policies at the old home were reformed to ensure that no one, regardless of their background, would face neglect or discrimination again. His newfound compassion spread through the facility, inspiring staff and residents alike. Helen's strength and forgiveness became a beacon of hope. Her actions reminded everyone of the power of empathy and the courage it takes to stand up against prejudice. Residents who had once remained silent found their voices, knowing that change was possible when they united for what was right. Marcus, too, found a deeper respect for his mother. Her resilience and kindness in the face of adversity taught him that even small acts of compassion could leave a lasting mark. As Helen left the old home, stronger than when she arrived, she carried with her a renewed sense of purpose. Her story became a reminder that change starts with a single step, and that step begins with courage. Share this story to inspire others. Together, we can create a world where empathy triumphs over prejudice, and kindness becomes our greatest strength.